that Robert is, hi, everyone, I can see you, but I can't hear you. That's
Mark,
Let me see.
you cannot hear me?
No, I hear you, but someone just sent us a chat that
Oh,
said,
yeah, that was
I can
Robert
see you,
Espia.
but where am I?
That's because I don't think we have started just yet. That's why.
Right.
Okay. Hi, Andrew, congratulations.
Thank you. Something
My
like that.
condolences.
It's either condolences or congratulations.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly,
depending on how you
exactly.
feel.
Hi, Michelle. So here's what we're going to be doing is what we're, everybody's going to start with, 5 to 7 minutes to introduce, and talk about your perspective on what's going on. So I thought we'd start off with Larry, then Stephanie, and then Andrew and Doug, and then we'll open it up to, Q&A for everyone. How does that work? Does that work well for you, everybody?
Works for me.
Fine with me.
Good. So we'll get started in 10 minutes. So other than that, how's
You are recording and live streaming right now, by the way.
the weather in Atlanta, Stephanie?
It is cloudy and it was raining all day yesterday.
Until we actually launch the meeting.
Here we've had a monsoon all day in New York. It's been rainy.
Yeah,
Which makes a lot of people on the call.
it was sunny in the morning and now it's cloudy and hopefully it will get sunny again. So I could go outside.
Good.
Can I get anyone anything to drink?
Yeah.
Oh, I
My God, where
that
are you?
background.
I like your background.
I've just transported from my bedroom to Whiskey War down on Essex Street.
All right.
We need to get some, so there's this
Okay, now I get it. Okay.
virtualcheers.com. I'll find the link and send it, but basically restaurants and bars can upload a picture of their establishment and then people can download it and at the same time make a contribution to the GoFundMe campaign for their employees. So you buy them, it's like, for 2 Manhattans or, 2 martinis and leave a tip and then you can get their back.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah.
I should do, I'm having a lot of virtual happy hour, so I should put that behind.
That's very
The
nice.
Zoom happy hour.
We've been having a lot of virtual, sometimes two consecutive ones with different friends. I'm seeing more of my friends than I have in years, actually. So.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine who lives in Yangon in Myanmar, and all the expats left. And so now he can't leave because he'd be quarantined in like a naval base for 2 weeks. Anyway, so we have a virtual happy hour, but unfortunately 8 o'clock at night on Friday night is 6:30 in the morning in Yangon. So he's starting the day off just right.
Yes.
Do you have a mimosa?
So it's an early, so you could like it's the last night, it's the last drink of the night.
We do a Zoom with my girlfriends that I've known since kindergarten every Wednesday, and somebody has to bring a surprise guest that they haven't seen since high school.
What a great idea.
And it's very funny. And it's like, what have you been doing for the past, 25 years?
Yeah.
That's very funny.
That's great.
I know this whole Zoom thing, and then like I'm waiting for all the the funny outtakes of things caught in the background that
There have been
people,
some.
didn't know were happening or were not supposed to be happening.
Oh, there have been quite a number of them. People going to the bathroom with leaving the heat on. And, oh my God.
I have to say,
I need a better background. I have to work on my background.
like it is so sunny by you down by 72nd Street or wherever you're
Yeah,
sitting.
it's a little pocket.
Beautiful.
The weather can change from block to block. I thought it was an apropos, Upper West Side picture.
Thank God all the scaffolding and everything came down off of
The Ansonia.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we made a phone call and
Yeah.
I do have some.
Larry, are you on twice?
Larry's on twice.
Oh, he is.
Oh,
You
I
did.
think he froze once and is coming back in.
Can't get enough of
frozen.
them.
Now he's frozen twice.
I'll be right back in a moment.
Does everyone hear me now?
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
You're back
Yes.
to normal.
I hear you.
Just so you know, I've been
Here's another one.
twice already.
I used to study voice at the Ansonia with Richard Frederick. And you'd get into the elevator. The Ansonia, Stephanie, it was a big, it's all the opera singers used to live there.
Yeah.
And you'd get into the elevator and they'd say, Maestro, how are you doing? And this was the elevator.
Giuseppe Verdi actually
every time, and
lived
that's
there.
the background
Yeah,
over
the
there.
British
Right.
Square.
Well,
That
I
beautiful
am,
Ozark building.
I am originally from New York, so
Oh,
you can tell
right.
by my accent. So,
Babe,
yeah.
Babe
We're
Ruth
good.
lived there too, and I spoke with the owners. They still cannot figure out which apartment he was in. They've gone to the post office, but because at the time, their mail was always given to the building address and then it was distributed
Right.
apartments. So there were never suite numbers or apartments on it. And they still don't, they figured out from some photographs what line he was in, but they don't know which apartment.
So that would be a cool thing to, when they go to sell the apartments, I bet they'll be in the real estate ads.
You're right. There was a farm
Might have
at
been.
the top of the building. There was a swimming pool,
Yeah.
cafe. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes, and then it's showtime.
All right.
Yeah, you have 76 people who were signed up pre-registered.
Great.
Wow.
Are we streaming right now?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Cool.
It seems like our friend Larry Haber is having his
Big
troubles
dot
with
on my-
the,
Probably freezing.
Okay, that's good. Let's see if I can help Larry.
He's like frozen.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
it.
Larry, you're also
Yep.
muted.
But that happens with the, depending on your internet service.
Right.
You may have some difficulties or not.
So Larry, you need to unmute yourself because you're going to be speaking now.
No, he's pretty skilled at this. He does a lot of.
No, yeah, he's just he's frozen. And there's Josh.
Hi, John.
It's a football game.
Wow. Talk about social distancing. Take me out to the ball game, man.
Hey, housekeeping wise, I've made Linda and Christian co-hosts, so you guys can mute and unmute and do all those things as you need to, okay?
Right.
Hey, Barbara.
Hey, Barbara. Hey, Josh.
This is so cool.
Morning, hello, or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Oh, God, it's so good to see you guys.
Larry
boy.
says he keeps getting kicked off. He's not having internet problems. Says he keeps getting kicked out.
I would say that those are probably internet problems.
Right. Well, he's saying.
Well-
All right.
Kristen, can you advise Larry? And then what we can do is we'll start with Stephanie. How's that?
Yes, we can. The thing with Larry is that Larry's doing what he's supposed to do. He has the correct link.
Okay.
Yeah. No, he's
The
got-
issue is
Well, he could call in.
Okay,
He
so
could
we'll
also
give
try
it
that.
another minute.
He also can call in, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why
And
don't
also,
you email
we've
him
got
to tell
another
him to call in?
Okay. Oh. Was that Larry? Okay.
Unmuted. Okay, quick reminder, housekeeping, for anybody who's not familiar, who it doesn't look like anybody's phoning in yet, but but if anybody does come in by phone, the way to raise your hand is *9, and the way to unmute yourself is *6. That may be useful as you guys go along.
Okay, I'm not getting it from my search. Okay, *9 to mute, to unmute *6.
There he is back. There
yeah.
you are, Larry.
Hey, Larry.
Oh, you're back. Okay.
Okay. If by chance I get kicked out, I will call in and I'll work my way back in video wise, okay?
Okay.
Okay. That's a solution. There's always a solution. So it's 12:30. I want to say hello to everybody. This is, as we know, it's surviving the pandemic. It's a conversation it's a real B2B conversation for restaurants and small retail businesses. I am a small business owner, although it's not retail. So we are feeling great pain, all of us. So what we're doing is we put together, thanks to Andrew and Doug and Mark, we put together a panel of experts who will give you an idea right now of what's going on, and then they will answer your questions. So you can put it into Q&A, but I see we're putting it into chat. So that's just as well, right, Christian?
Yes,
So
that's correct.
Christian Cordova and I'm Linda Alexander, are the co-chairs of the Business and Consumer Issues Committee. We have our fearless leader, Chairman of CB7, Mark Diller here. And then we've got all of a whole bunch of really great members of CB7, Community Board 7, Manhattan. So let's get started. Our panelists comprise today Larry Haber, who is the managing partner of the commercial real estate department for bi-coastal law firm Abrams, Garfinkel, Margolis, Berkson, LLP. And he is going to be the first to speak. Then he's going to be followed by, and everybody knows Larry Haber, and he knows everybody, and it's perfect. And then we have Stephanie O'Rourke, who is a CPA as a partner of Cohn Resnick, and she leads the firm's hospitality industry practice. And she specializes in businesses that operate 1 to 30 units, and she's been assisting clients nonstop, 24/7 now. Then we've got our own Andrew Ridgey, who is the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, and also currently a business advisor to Governor Cuomo. And then our own, another vice chair of Community Board 7, Doug Kleiman, who he's a retail leasing and sales specialist. He's also a lifelong Upper West Sider. He's probably populated the retail corridors on the Upper West Side better than anyone. So not only does he walk, he knows everybody in the area. So let's get started. Larry, it's showtime.
Okay, so how is everyone? Listen, we're going to be talking about a lot of things today, but it's really about the road to recovery and how we get everyone in retail, as the talking heads used to sing, off of the road to nowhere. It's generally my belief that in order for restaurateurs, for example, to get on this road to recovery, they're going to have to essentially channel my 6 R's of recovery, and that's reimagine, reinvent, reset, repurpose, reconfigure, and lastly, become very good at arithmetic. That's going to be a major challenge to everyone. Taking it a step further, and I know you're obviously working with the government with what you do, but contrary to the Ronald Reagan quote, which said the most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." As we all sit here today, we need the government to be a collaborative partner. They're the 4th dance partner in this little triangle that's right now landlords, tenants, and the bank. And without this collaborative dance partner, essentially, it's not going to happen. The chances of recovery are going to be, as they say in Brooklyn, forget about it. So with that all said, there's roughly 10 things that I want to touch upon, during my, short presentation. And the first one is, and my understanding is the camera's off, but you do hear me, so that's a good thing. I spend a good part of my day trying to convince my landlord clients, and I'm 2 to 1 at least representing tenants these days, but I try to convince them that when they do get a request for rental relief, they need to channel their inner Toy Story in the song, if you remember, "You Got a Friend in Me," because, the bottom line is landlords need tenants, and that's never, I think, been more apparent than it is right now. Okay, but the problem is that a lot of tenants are basically viewing landlords as the second coming, as Satan, for no better way of putting it. So not that I'm trying to sit there and tell you that you need to channel Mick Jagger and have sympathy for the devil that many perceive the landlord being, but many of these landlords, remember, are mom and pops that are living off of the rentals, okay, as a way of surviving. They're worrying at night whether or not they're going to lose their properties. And I'm not advocating, once again, for landlords here, but landlords do have their own tale of woe. And those are financial, how they deal with their lender, what their lender will allow them to do, not to do. And your rent payment as a tenant, remember, goes to paying for operating expenses, such as real estate taxes, payroll, and utilities. So the short is, they have their own problems as well. Another thing that I'm seeing too much of, is that landlords and tenants, whether they like it or not, they all have a little bit of Glenn Close in them. If you remember from the movie Fatal Attraction and her line, "I will not be ignored." Well, the bottom line is I'm imploring both sides to not ignore one another. You need to keep open lines of communications. Whenever I've been negotiating with a landlord or a tenant, depending on which side I'm on, for those who have ignored, it's a much tougher road for me. I'm basically, going off on another line, with Led Zeppelin. They had a song, if you remember, called Communication Breakdown. That is not going to get some type of rental relief done. As far as the payroll protection plan is concerned, I'm sure Stephanie and Andrew are going to go off it in a bigger way. But right now, listen, it's impractical the way it's set up, especially for restaurateurs. Having to rehire everyone, immediately within the next 2 months is crazy. It has to be extended out to at least 6 months. The repayment, assuming there isn't going to be forgiveness, can't be just 2 years. And, just on a related note, many of the landlords that I'm dealing with are basically saying, hey, listen, we want to know if you applied for PPP. We want to know whether you've gotten it or not. Where are you in the process? Have you filed for business interruption insurance? We know that chances are that is not going to happen, but you need to do it anyway to cover yourself. So they want to know that. And they also want to know if you've drawn on any lines of credit that you might have otherwise. As far as, landlords being receptive to a retail tenant's request for rental relief, that tale of woe that you tell to the landlord, you really need to, have a creative game plan for recovery. Many landlords are going to want financial statements from you, both the tenant and especially from small businesses, those of the guarantors, the principals. They're going to want to see sales logs, both current and obviously from past years. And tenants need to know that the landlords essentially, so off of a beer that I happen to like, it's called a little something something. And if you want a little something something from the landlord, namely in the form of rental relief, you're going to have to give up a little something something. Some of the examples are, listen, I've had a lot of luck in the recent past, talking about in the last month, where a tenant is near the end of their lease, and whether that's 6 months or a year and a half out, where we've done a blend, amend, and extend, where we've increased the lease term. We've been able to get a significant amount of free rent accelerated to now, and then some into next year. And that basically, in most instances, will not require the consent of a lender, which is extremely important. Other things that tenants I see that they're being asked to give up are if they had any termination right in the lease, an early termination right, foregoing that. Landlords asking for termination rights. Back in the Great Recession, Kimco, who owns an awful lot of property nationally, were giving a lot of rent reductions to tenants, especially mom and pops, but they were putting in their agreements in a number of cases that in 2 years, the landlord would have a right to terminate the lease so they can replace that mom and pop with the Starbucks of the world. So obviously, as a tenant, do not agree to that. There's been relinquishment of exclusivity rights. For those of you who sign good guy guarantees, if you've only agreed to 60 days notice that you have to give in advance to a landlord, I have a lot of landlords asking to increase that to 180 days. I've also, where there was a good guy before, some landlords are saying you can't exercise that good guy clause for a few years. So there's various examples there. As far as leases that were about to be signed in late February, early March, or which were signed then, or even deals that I'm still negotiating. I'm actually negotiating deals for retail space, crazy as that may sound. I've been adding in language. This is wearing my tenant hat, okay? Along the lines of, and I'm sorry it's going to sound a little bit boring, but it's important, and I can send this along to everyone later. If as a result of the impact of COVID-19 or any other pandemic, epidemic, virus, natural disaster, government mandated shutdowns, national or state emergency, and/or, this is important, any other reason beyond tenant's reasonable control, the landlord is delayed in delivering the premises and/or in completing any of landlord's work, or tenant is unable to obtain municipal construction approvals, permits, construction and/or materials, adequate labor, or there is any prohibition or moratorium on construction, permitting, inspections, and/or non-essential business operations, or tenant can't perform its initial build-out or open or operate, they will receive a day-for-day rent credit. I know that's long-winded. I'm actually getting some traction on that because, and I'll talk about later, a lot of landlords realize that, they do need to work with tenants and they don't want to have vacant space on their hands. As far as landlords, when, short of the request by a tenant being for a full or partial free rent, when there's at least extension, many of them are hamstrung by their loan documents. If their loan is with a local bank or a portfolio lender, it's easier for them to work with the bank. If it's easier for them to work with the bank, it's then easier for the landlord to work with the tenant. Those who have CMBS loans, commercial mortgage-backed security loans, those are a nightmare. As far as using security is concerned, as a means of paying all or part of the rent right now, when on the landlord side, we're insisting, that it be repaid over a 3 to 6 month period, starting late summer, early fall. When I'm on the tenant side, especially if my client has deposited 3 or more months of rent, we basically are asking that we don't have to repay the security deposit. We apply it towards the rent. We accelerate it on a burn baby burn reduction basis, meaning if there was 6 months of security on hand, we ask for either 100% or 50% deferral, okay? And then we apply the security deposit to the balance and we don't pay it back. We say to the landlord, we've been here, we've been a good tenant. The worst thing you can say about us is that the check arrived in a timely fashion at the beginning of the month before this tumult. If that doesn't work, as far as the repayment is concerned, which is more common, you want it to be over a longer period, 6 to 18 months, and not beginning until late fall or January of 2021. On a side note, and I think, Andrew, this is one of the initiatives that you asked for in your 12-point plan, as far as being able to get landlords to give the security deposits for working capital purposes. So far, when I've asked for that, it's fallen on deaf ears. 2 more or 3 more points, using a line from Star Wars as to, their line, may the force be with you, as in force majeure. It's not something that, barring unforeseen circumstances, that will help a tenant in not paying their rent. As far as the liquor license is concerned, I've been asking for and getting some language in lease restructurings that as long as the SLA continues to ease up on their laws as it relates to selling alcohol off premises, we've expanded the use that's allowed. And in addition, I think also, Andrew, this is one of your initiatives that, trying to get the SLA to allow in New York City, like they do in other areas of the state, to allow a restaurateur to operate on a temporary license basis. Pre-COVID, it had gotten to be somewhere between 7 and 9 months to get a liquor license in New York City, which borders on absurdity. Last point, and this is a positive one, I feel truly that more landlords than not understand that the cost associated with vacant space, such as having no rent, having to give free rent concessions when a new deal happens, TI costs, and commissions, it's the equivalent of going to an old drive-in movie theater by yourself in a taxi cab with the meter running, and without wearing a mask, having any Purell on hand or gloves on. It makes no sense. So I'm assuming everyone is still hearing me. I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to probably sign back in again.
Great, thank you so much. for that information. You actually answered one of the questions I had for you. So we're going to bring in Stephanie O'Rourke here, and Stephanie's going to talk to us about PPP and some of the other things and insurance, et cetera. So Stephanie, you've got the floor.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to talk about some of the government relief that is out there for retail and the restaurant segment. I'm going to start with, as Larry indicated, with the PPP. The good news, people are saying the good news is I got the money. The bad news is I got the money. So because they can't spend it. Most, obviously in New York City, either their, restaurants and retail are either shut down completely, or they're running at a very low capacity, maybe delivery, or, again, opening up their own little supermarkets to get rid of their inventory, and also to find ways, more creative ways to stay in business. So, this legislation came out fast and furious. They did 5 years. The Congress did 5 years of legislation in a 2-week period of time. So obviously there's so much to interpretation. It made me laugh. They came out with how to calculate the loan for the PPP 23 days after everyone had their applications in. So, much like when they put out the Tax Jobs Act, that we're still getting guidance on that. And that came out in the end of 2017, and we're sitting here in April of 2020, and we still get alerts on, oh, this is what we really meant, and this is how you should handle it. So it is a moving target. It's very fluid. I won't have any references to any movies or music, so like Larry did, but I will kind of, some of the issues that I think restaurateurs and retail operations and anybody who's actually is not deemed an essential service and has shelter in places such as New York are going to have with this program, which was really going to be, when it first came out, the lifeboat of the life preservers for all these companies. We're still waiting on the loan forgiveness guidelines. There's been a ton of lobbying in the restaurant industry. I've been intricately involved in that, and in order to make it more sense, it just doesn't, the spirit of it, and it seemed, to get everybody back to work and to give operators additional money to pay some rent and utilities and interest and whatnot. It all sounded great at the beginning, but it just doesn't align with the reality of the situation, the timeline of when you have to spend the money and how you have to spend the money, quite frankly. And, to Larry's point, it's trouble. You can't spend, landlords are asking, did you get the PPP money? How much did you get? And, when are you going to start paying rent? But if they don't have any employees to spend the money on, if they're not employing everybody because they've laid off pretty much 90 to 100% of their employees, they are really precluded from paying the landlords at this point in time. They came out with a 75% mandate, and that was after the fact that came out on April 2nd, 75% mandate that 75% of the loan proceeds, as well as the forgiveness, the amount forgiven, has to be paid towards payroll. So we've recommended to our clients and friends of the firm that for every dollar you spend, make sure you're spending 75 cents on payroll costs first and foremost, and then you could look to the other expenses to utilize these funds for the other expenses. So it's been the restaurant operators and retail owners are having, they have an issue because they're trying to make good on their rent and work with their landlords, but they are mandated that they can't use the money. And they really haven't come out with some of the guidelines as, is this really going to be deemed a misuse of funds? And they're pretty, if we don't do the 75-25, would that be deemed a misuse of funds? And there are criminal and fraud charges, and obviously nobody wants to get into that. So until they give us some better guidance on that, it's going to be an issue, going forward to use this money. The 8-week time clock we talked, that starts the day you get the money, the day you get your first disbursement. And I have tons of clients asking me, okay, the 8-week time clock comes, I'm not even open. This is just me, this is just us, privatizing, unemployment. And now what do I do with these people when it's on my dime, right? So I'm going to take everybody off of unemployment who's had such a hard time getting on unemployment to get the unemployment benefits, to bring them back for 8 weeks. when I'm not even open, I really have nothing for them to do. Oh, and then I'm going to let them go after that because I can't afford, based upon what the new normal is, I can't afford to keep these people on. So that's, obviously a terrible issue. And getting people back, expansion of the unemployment benefits, that's an issue as well. I have a lot of clients who are I have a national practice. So where in states where their things are starting to open up and they can't even get their employees to come back because they're making more on unemployment than they are working for them. So it's a matter of the states and, working with the business operators to say, we need you to get back to work. This is the point. We need you to get back to work. So, and then lastly, the servicing of the debt, right? So that's, going from 10 years to 2 years. I think when it first came out, people's attitude was, you know what, if I don't use it all, it's not going to be that horrible. It's a 10-year debt. It's doable. It's at a fairly low interest rate, and I could probably manage it. When it got shifted to 2 years, now, yeah, there's a 6-month deferral of payment, but when it did get shifted to 2 years, I mean, that was a game changer for a lot of people. We all know that the margins are really thin in some of these, whether it be restaurants and some retail operations. And so to be able to service it in such a short period of time, because there will be way more debt out there than originally anticipated based upon just what the circumstances are. So that becomes, for many of the smaller companies, smaller restaurant groups who might have had debt on their books to begin with, it's just not it's just not feasible. The math doesn't work for them. So there's going to be a lot of people who made the decision and they haven't really told us what if, because I do have clients that said, you know what, I'm going to sit on the money. I'm going to sit on the money and see when the provisions come out, when the forgiveness provisions come out, see, maybe I'll get some forgiveness. Maybe I'll just wait and I will have a loan and hopefully they'll extend the maturity date, or hopefully they'll, do something that's going to benefit, extend the cure periods that are out there associated with getting your full-time equivalents back. And so maybe they'll all do that and I'll sit on the money for those 8 weeks and we'll see what happens when I really open up, And, but they haven't come out with, okay, well, this is misuse of funds, but what about non-use of funds? There really hasn't been any specific guidelines because you are certifying, when you applied for this loan, you are certifying that you will retain and retain employees and maintain payroll. So it is really going against one of your certifications because you're not hiring anybody back. So there's a lot of gray areas here. They did, if there's any larger companies out there that might have access to liquidity, now they're coming because of these large companies that, the Shake Shacks and the Ruth Chris's of the world, who, just to name, 2 public companies that were able to get the PPP loans and they gave them the money back. But because now they're putting they're putting more restrictions where they had credit elsewhere was waived because that's traditional in the 7A program. That's traditional that it's for people who can't get traditional banking. So they go to the 7A program, they go to the SBA for it. And so now they're relooking because the Treasury got a lot of heat, obviously, and banks are getting heat for giving it to the larger companies when it was more, their intent was to give it to the smaller businesses. And there's a lot of groups. We have a lot of groups within the firm. We represent 600 restaurant groups. So I represent why I specialize on the smaller side. I do have clients that have 175 Taco Bells. So now they're thinking, that are owned by private equity companies that were able to participate in the program based upon the initial rules. Now they're rethinking about giving back the money. So again, while it was the life preserver, it's becoming less and less attractive if they don't change some of the parameters surrounding it.
Stephanie, that's great. We're going to, this is again, you answered a couple more of my questions. We have, we're getting some very good chat questions, but I want to segue into Andrew and then Doug, and then we're going to open it up to all these questions.
Okay, I just wanted to can I just talk about the emergency loan for a second, or do we not have time?
No, just sure. So just, yeah.
All right. I just want many of you, in conjunction with the PPP, you applied for the economic injury disaster loan, and that's something. Again, it might be a much better option if you do get it. It might be a much better option. They're all the clients that I know that have received it, all 30-year maturities. a decent amount of money that they were awarded. I had many that $500, $400, $300,000. So really much more flexibility of use of funds. And if it's not over $200,000, there's not a personal guarantee on it. So for many operators, specifically some of the smaller ones who don't want it, it's much more manageable debt that they could put on their books and have the flexibility to use the funds for working capital purposes, not only payroll and rent, but also to be able to, you know, maybe buy the inventory and get up and running again. So that's just something, and I can answer questions about some other relief, but I don't want to take up Andrew's time.
Andrew, what's up?
Oh, a lot. Well, you know, I'll just touch really quickly on the PPP, but, you know, really what we have been asking our federal leaders to do is amend the PPP, and it needs to get done as soon as possible because, as Stephanie pointed out, the time period is really running up. And what was intended to be this massive federal program to help keep people employed and to help small businesses, when it comes to the restaurant industry, it's actually doing the opposite, as we just explained. It's putting business owners in really tough positions where, you know, if they're not getting the money, they're saying bad news, I didn't get the money. And if they are getting it, they're saying bad news, you know, I got the money too, because they don't know how to handle it. So we really need an extension of the forgiveness period. We're asking at a minimum it be the end of 2020. We all know, or I say we all do not know, when we will be permitted to reopen restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. We do not know exactly yet when we are able to reopen, under what reduced occupancy it will potentially be. And then we also do not know what consumer purchasing behavior is going to be. Are folks going to be comfortable going, eating, drinking out? You know, are you going to stand 5 deep at a busy bar like the one that I'm pretending to be in to try to get a beer? Probably not. When are the 70 million tourists going to come back to New York City? College. So there's all these other outside factors that really aren't solely dependent on what government does that, you know, only time will tell. So we need the longer extension period for us to be able to hire back our staff, a minimum the end of 2020. We also need more than 25% of that loan to be allocated towards rent and utilities and other expenses, because I'm sure we'll get into it. New York City, it's a high commercial rent place. So if we can't allocate more of that money towards our rent, especially after we've been closed for multiple months, there's no way small business owners are ever going to be able to pay that back. So that's a big issue. The other big issue that we're dealing with at a federal level, but also at a state level, and there's been some bills introduced, is business interruption insurance. I won't get into all the complexities here. There's some policies that clearly exclude virus and pandemic. There's other policies where it's not clear. And then there's other policies that actually have a virus inclusion. And the insurers are basically denying all claims across the board. And there's a lot of legal concerns. There's a lot of questions about if the federal government needs to backstop the insurance companies and get these claims paid out, because frankly, there is a system in place to pay out claims. That's what the insurance industry does. And frankly, they do it pretty well. And if we wanted to get money, that would make the most sense. People have policies, they have limits in their policies, ways that they can use the money. These things tend to be clearly defined, whereas programs like the PPP or any yet to be created program, as well intended as they are, when you are working under incredibly difficult circumstances, under tight time frames, any massive program like this is going to have challenges and unintended consequences that you're going to need to go back and fix, which we see from the PPP. And that's why we're imploring our elected leaders to get this done fast, because if we don't fix the PPP or do something like getting business interruption insurance paid out, we are not going to be able to deal with the massive issue of how are small businesses going to get money to stay open, because they don't have reserves. They don't have access to these other capital markets that are going to help float them and big investors, especially like a lot of the small neighborhood restaurants and retail shops in our community on the Upper West Side. So those are the two big issues. As was mentioned earlier, I was honored to be appointed to Governor Cuomo's Reopening Advisory Board, which we will obviously convey all of these different issues. The organization, I run the New York City Hospitality Alliance, has 50 or more policy ideas at a city, state, and even federal level of what be done and what needs to be enacted. Certainly we need to have discussions, but it's really time for action. We have a lot of the policy ideas. I think it's going to take the political will to get them done. Yesterday, I testified at a city council hearing on a few bills that I think are critically important, especially to restaurants and businesses in our neighborhood, including bars. One's a little bit more restaurant focused, but it would cap third-party delivery fees at no more than 10%. Many people don't realize companies like Grubhub and Seamless, while they may have a nice app that makes it easy for you to place your orders, they charge between 15 and 30% per order to the restaurant. So if you're ordering a big dinner for your family and everything and just say it's $100, they could be taking almost $30 of that, where a restaurant's profit margin in good times, if they're doing everything right, maybe it's 10%. So restaurants tend to actually lose money, but they need that revenue to help offset their other expenses. And what I've heard from a lot of restaurateurs, many of whom live and own businesses in our communities, they're saying, listen, I'm not trying to make money off of this delivery. I'm just trying to stay open, to be a service to the neighborhood, to make sure that Upper West Siders have, food supply, and they don't always have to just go out to the grocery stores and everything, because we're a vital aspect of the food supply chain. So that would be one bill, capping the third-party fees at 10%. And there's some other related bills that would be very helpful as well. Another one would, and I don't want to start a whole controversy here, but one of them has to do with sidewalk cafes and waiving those fees, which is, I don't think, controversial. Restaurants that have sidewalk cafes shouldn't use the, shouldn't have to pay fees, especially if they're unable to operate them. And once they are able to operate them, we imagine the dining public may be more comfortable eating in outside spaces versus inside of a restaurant. Particularly if the restaurant is required to have a reduced occupancy, we're going to have to use sidewalk cafe space and even some other public spaces to try to generate commerce and support these businesses that are operating under government mandated, which is important, reduced occupancy or shutdown. So I think there's some creative things that, communities in different neighborhoods should look for, is how can we create, and of course, a safe way, commerce and economic activity, and eventually start getting people out when it's safe to do so under the appropriate circumstances. The third bill that's really important, and then I'll hand it over to Doug, is Larry mentioned this good guy guarantee or good guy clause that's in many leases. We had a bill introduced that would basically just suspend the personal liability provision in leases for the duration of, COVID-19 related matters. This would mean, like, hey, I've heard from restaurant and other business people, like, I've opened up businesses and they've shut. It's never easy to lose a business. But if all of a sudden businesses are shutting because they're prohibited by government to be open, and then all of a sudden the landlords, and there's a lot of great landlords, I'm not saying all of them are doing this, but they can then go after the owners of those businesses' personal assets. You could lose your home and your other assets. And that would only compound how tragic this whole situation is. If people are not only losing their businesses and people are losing their jobs, and Upper West Siders are losing their favorite shops and restaurants and bars, but then the owners of those businesses are losing all of their personal assets. So we think this would be a very important bill to pass to help protect people. And if the federal, state, or city government needs to step in to support the landlords as well, we would support that. But we have an unprecedented situation at hand, and we need to have big, bold policies to help support our city as a whole. Otherwise, it's going to be bad news. And because of the timely nature of all this, we need these policies enacted like immediately. We can't wait. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug, and then, of course, like everyone else, happy to answer some more specific questions.
Thanks, Andrew, and Stephanie and Larry. I mean, I echo so much of what you said. My role as a broker is really teamwork with all different components of the situation. Look, people are asking me, what's my business like right now? And fundamentally, it's actually not different because my job inherently is compromise. And of course, it's like navigating, in the ocean, but in the middle of a hurricane. And even in some ways it's worse because in a hurricane, if you have radar, you know where the hurricane begins and ends. We don't actually know where we are exactly. In a weather forecast, you know that the weather forecast is pretty accurate, 48 hours. But then when you get into 5-day forecast, 7 and 10 days, it's not very predictable. We don't know where we are. Someone said we're in the middle of this. Well, we're in the midst of this. We do see some really great improvement, but we don't know. So a lot of what I do is quantifying, right? So leases have a start date and an end date. And then there are liabilities and responsibilities. And how does a business owner project their revenue? How does a landlord project its income? And all these things are, we're trying to be creative in the middle, we're trying to make order out of chaos, really, and to be creative in the middle of chaos. So, a lot of, we've been hearing, clearly, the worst part about this is human life and illness. That's paramount. There's nothing more, but we're having a business discussion. But I can't help but think that when we always hear the reminders of people being at the greatest risk for this virus, underlying health conditions is always mentioned. And that is true in business as well. So businesses that had underlying health issues, meaning they were already having a problem. Andrew mentioned on the delivery fees and all sorts of issues that were facing retail so profoundly from e-commerce and all these. Well, these things have magnified so much more now. And there are a lot of businesses that were already at the edge of failure, and this may push them over the edge. We're in the middle of a fire. And the idea is when you have a fire, the fire department has to get there as quickly as possible. And so a lot of these bills, legislation issues, business interruption, these things have to happen quickly or we're going to have much worse failure. I think it's very clear that small business is the backbone of business in the entire country. And if we let small business fail, we are going to have a massive national problem, worse than we can imagine. So we got to get it real quick that small businesses need help and need it quick. Business interruption, just real quick, that's a whole, I don't want to get too granular on that, but there was a wonderful webinar that I believe Andrew was part of, and an attorney was just explaining that we don't want to go down the path of class action suits, which could take 5-7 years, and maybe the restaurant owner or the business owner gets a check eventually in a class action settlement, but their business is long gone. Much like in Hurricane Sandy, when people were suing insurance companies, they finally got their money, but their house was gone years ago. We need the help now. And on the PPP, I see some great things. I saw Congressman Nadler talking about extending the forgiveness period, changing the ratio of the 75-25 on payroll. I'm hopeful. I think that some of our electeds, with the help of all the great lobbying that's being done in a good way, lobbyists sometimes have a bad rep, but I think this is very necessary in this time. Again, fundamentally, people are asking me, well, what do I do in this situation? Every situation is a little different. Where is a particular tenant or business in their cycle? Are they pre-lease signing? Have they signed the lease and now they're pre-construction or during construction? Have they been open for business and they're in the middle of a 10-year lease? They're in the 5-year and they're in good standing. So this is really back to fundamentals. There is a human element to this, which is most important. And I think that we're all coming to understand, and if we don't understand it, it's going to be the failure of both landlords and tenants, that landlord and tenant relationship has always been symbiotic. And to the degree that a landlord is going to be greedy or selfish, they're going to hurt themselves ultimately. And that's the same for tenants. I've seen some tenants asking for forgiveness that have no business asking for forgiveness because this is an exception, more the exception than the rule, but there are some businesses that are actually thriving now. But obviously most need help. So I'll leave it there. But my job is many faceted and it requires teamwork from the electeds, from great attorneys to draft all the things that we come up with, and so I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Doug. that was great. And you know what? I neglected to mention the name of your firm. I mentioned everybody else's firm. It's Ripco, and they're prominent.
I'm not speaking on behalf of Ripco.
I'm not
Community
pitching it, it's
board,
just
but,
that I
but
did
yes,
like
I do happen to work for Ripco, and I'm very proud.
We got a wonderful question. The first question came from Kara Milling, and she wanted to know when we were talking about PPP, and Larry, Andrew, Doug, Stephanie, this is actually pertinent to all of you. So whoever wants to come in on it, please do. Does paying insurance count as salary? This is about PPP. If we are paying their insurance, but not if we're paying their insurance, but not their salary. So
Like health insurance, employee health insurance, is that the question?
Yeah, it would have to be health insurance, although we pay insurance, we pay disability, we pay workman's comp, we pay insurances on our employees. So does that factor into it? That might Stephanie question.
Do you want me to answer? I can answer that, right? So health insurance does factor into it, but you have to understand that the way the rules are written right now, you could pay, if you do not get your full-time equivalent employees back, whatever you pay out would be drastically reduced. So if you furloughed people and you're paying their health insurance, but again, you haven't hired them back to be full-time equivalent employees, you're not going to get really any credit. None of that will be forgiven.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have another question from Stephen Sotenik. Sotenjik. I'm screwing up his name. I'm sorry, Stephen.
Hello, Stephen.
Okay, it's for Larry or Andrew. You alluded to this in your initial comments, but do you think a long-term consequence of the COVID pandemic is a loosening of liquor license restrictions in tougher CBs in an effort to boost the restaurant industry? This is a restaurateur, definitely. Yes.
No, he's a
do you want to take that, Larry, Andrew?
Well, Andrew will have better pearls of wisdom.
You go first, Larry. I'll follow you.
I think it's an absolute necessary, and whether it's done on a 6-month, 12-month, or 24-month basis, it's plain and simple. Restaurants cannot survive on 25% capacity.
Okay.
They can't survive on 50% capacity. I think 75% is probably the hope, the prayer, and the dream, and you need alternate ways of being able to get revenue. The ones who are the most creative are going to be the ones who survive, I think, and having the relaxation of the liquor laws is important. You're always worried about it. Are we going to become Bourbon Street, in New Orleans, as a consequence of doing that? I don't think that's going to be the case. Mm-hmm. But you're looking for ways of being creative, and whether, listen, coming up with takeout, the restaurants that weren't capable of delivering good takeout to begin with couldn't adapt, to be able to do this immediately. And the same thing applies with everything else that's going to happen. But I think it's very important that the SLA, one, lighten up and allow the offsite consumption, and two, they have to make us how they treat upstate, and that is allow temporary licenses. Otherwise, this 7 to 9 month backlog, which existed pre-COVID, you're not going to be able to survive.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
I think Stephen's question was regarding some community boards that are more reluctant to approve liquor licenses.
Yeah. I think
I hope they would loosen up a bit.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of, every day we keep hearing of, places that have already decided to close, whether it was, Coogan's, uptown from here, or you just heard Pegu Club, the bar down Houston just closed, or Lucky Strike. So there's all these places that have already announced they've closed. I also think we may see an initial bump in places that initially reopen, but then after, 6 months, 8 months, 12, 18 months, they're just not going to be able to ever get back. So I do think folks on community boards are going to have to start thinking about these issues, particularly in neighborhoods where there were challenging applications. What do we want our neighborhoods to look like in the future? And the truth is restaurants and bars you tend to be industries historically that no matter what your background, you could kind of get into this industry, and they bring traffic onto the street, which is going to be critically important to have folks out and about to get back to some sense of normal. For our city and state, we know what dire financial situation we are in. people, I hope, want to go out and eat and drink, and it's going to generate sales tax and employ people. So I think we're going to have a more macro, look, community boards tend to look very micro, this is my neighborhood, this is my block. And that's understandable. I mean, I'm on the community board, so I completely get it. I think we're all going to have to kind of step back and look at what are we as a city, state, and a nation going to do to get our economy and our jobs and our businesses back moving again. And in order to do that, restaurants and bars are going to be a vital part of that recovery. And these businesses, frankly, cannot survive financially without having a liquor license. So I do hope there will be thoughtful conversations, and I'm sure there will be, when it comes to applications, perhaps in a way that is different than in the past at some point. But I know on Community Board 7, and not speaking on behalf of the board, that the members are incredibly thoughtful. The discussions we have through our BCI committee really take a lot of these factors into play when we're making decisions. So my overall hope is, it could be a reset in certain ways to have these bigger, important discussions about the future of our neighborhood and the future of our city. Because I've said it over and over again that I cannot imagine a world in which our city's economy recovers without restaurants and nightlife and our cultural institutions being at the core of that recovery. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know if
so we have a wonderful segue right here too, because this is a question from Renee Baruch. She says, retail, this is probably a Doug question. Retail was in significant difficulty prior to this crisis. What is the forecast for retail on the Upper West Side when this is passed? Do you think rents will decrease for retail? Doug?
Look, the basic law of supply and demand is fundamental in setting rents, whether it's residential or commercial. So I think we're going to have to see when the smoke clears where we are. We've had an uncomfortable amount of vacancy in the last number of years. I don't have a crystal ball. I can tell you that the landlords that I represent are being thoughtful and reasonable. Otherwise, I don't really want to represent them, quite frankly, because it would be futile. But, it's hard to say. I think that we were in a market where owner meaning landlords were bringing down the rents, which started to increase transactional activity, transactions. I have to imagine that we're going to continue going in that same path. And by the way, what I said before about underlying health conditions, whether with a business, I've spoken to a lot of landlords. Some landlords are not highly leveraged. Their hands are not necessarily tied by their lenders. Some are. And those landlords that are less leveraged, that have reserve capital, are in probably a better position to offer more accommodations to their tenants. And that's a good thing. But even if they aren't, or they think they're not, vacancy is always an enemy of a landlord. And just like we have to think about this holistically, whether you want to vilify a landlord, all landlords are bad, all tenants are good, of course, that's not true. A lot of landlords are still waiting for guidance as to what their relief is going to be. Are they going to get any forbearance on their loans? If they don't have a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan, they will not get forbearance at this time. Depends on their personal relationships with their banks. Are they going to get rent relief if we're calling for rent strikes? I understand. But are the landlords going to get relief on their property taxes or on their water sewer bills? By the way, one quick thing, this may not be a huge piece, but every little piece of the puzzle is an important one. A client of mine told me recently that he got a huge bill for Con Edison, and he called Con Edison and said, how is it possible that my bill is more than it was months ago? And Con Ed said, because the meter readers are not able to be out, so we calculated your average bill over the preceding year, and therefore when we are able to come back and read your meter, we'll give you a credit. And the tenant said, no, I can't loan you money I'm in an emergency, and literally 90% of my electric consumption is I'm closed. So that's just another little piece of the puzzle.
Okay, we just got another question from Chander Balachandran. I'm sorry if I'm messing up the pronunciation. Can you, this is probably a Stephanie question or a Larry question. Can you force employees to come to work? And it flies into the idea that some workers are making more on unemployment. I guess that was, but can you force employees to come to work, especially that when they are making so much on unemployment, plus the, I guess, payments, I would imagine, the stimulus payments?
Larry, do you want to take that, or would you like me to?
I give personal, business, and professional advice, and my answer is no, you cannot. Okay, you have to. This is. We all walk this very delicate tightrope of life, health, and safety. Okay, and that's paramount. But and then you have there is no life, health, and safety, or if there is no economy. The bottom line is you can't fire somebody if they have certain beliefs as far as COVID is concerned. There are people who just will not get on a subway for the next 6 months. How does that person get to work? Short of the employer being able to, pay for an Uber both ways. Who knows if they even want to get into an Uber? In my world, no, you cannot fire someone for that. You need to be able to make sure that they can do their job, and it's not something. Listen, restaurants can't work at home is one of the sayings out there. If it's an office job, for the most part, listen, I'm as operational right now at home as I am in the office. I'm seeing more people. I've been doing these webinars. So, as it relates to, the answer, no, you can't fire someone for that. You got to try to accommodate.
Well, I think they're also asking, can you force them, to force them to come back to work? And that's, it's really going to be, if they do feel comfortable to come in, they're not going to be able to, they have to work with the unemployment agencies, because the unemployment, when you're on unemployment, you have to prove that you've been looking for work. So if the unemployment agencies, which a lot of them have said, California, Connecticut, if people don't feel comfortable going back to work, they are not going to force them off unemployment. So it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I would just say I've had a couple of these conversations again, and not giving as legal advice, but to receive unemployment, you are supposed to be actively looking to be employed. I suspect there may be some relaxation in this, and then the factors that Stephanie just brought up as well, is there are the health concerns about going into work. So it's a very difficult situation. I forget what state it is, but I just read something, and forgive me, I forget all the details, where they were actually looking to penalize workers if they are permitted, if they are asked to return back to work and decide not to. I don't imagine that would happen in a state like New York, nor am I advocating for it. But this clearly is an issue, across the country.
Yeah, and just one other thing to add on it. That right now, the extra $600 that comes from the Fed expires July 31st. If that isn't extended, it becomes a different conversation. Right now, a person, at least in New York City, who's making $75,000 approximately, makes as much staying home, because they're taking home about $1,100, which is about the equivalent of, if you're paying 30% taxes, what you would make on 75. The conversation becomes different if we're not fully back to work until June 15th. It's only a 6-week period. So I think that the equation will change once the 600 goes away as it relates to that.
Right. We have, I had my own question, by the way, for Andrew and
well, Linda, I had one from Steve in here. I can answer that, but if you want to ask.
Oh, sorry. No.
No, okay. Yeah, Steve was just asking about, and some of you may have seen the governor and the mayor announced the suspension of the subway service between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. I think obviously I need to dig into it a little bit, but restaurants can still operate doing delivery and takeout, but a classic bar or clubs, they are currently closed. We have to imagine that their reopening will be much later than, or at some point after restaurants reopen, just because of the structure and nature of the business. So I think immediately it's a non-issue because no one's operating, 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. I think there's, other concerns. So I imagine this is all being, kind of coordinated. And these will have to be discussions once. First, how long is the shutdown of service going to go on for? And how does that flesh up against the reopening of bars and nightclubs? And I mean, even restaurants, a traditional restaurant, I mean, some are open after 1, but, many of them are, done. And especially if we're thinking we're going to be under reduced occupancy and maybe not as many people are going to be out eating and drinking, folks may be able to, kind of leave work by midnight or so, or 11 to get home to wherever it is they are on the subways. But clearly an issue. And that's why I was saying before, these are really massive, complex issues, and they're going to impact everyone in so many different ways. Some we've probably yet to even fathom, and we're going to have to be flexible enough to enact policies to address the issues that come up that we haven't thought of. And we're also going to need to be, as New Yorkers, I think, flexible in our, patience that there may be different changes, and we all are in this together, and we're going to have to do our best to put up with these inconveniences, because hopefully the sooner we can put up with these inconveniences and get through it, we'll get back to some sense of normal where we can start riding the train at 3 o'clock in the morning or whenever it may be. But
I'll pass. Yeah.
Well, they basically bakers, have overnight hours. So
Yeah, no, and they were also talking about using the city paying for Uber. The mayor was talking about, and paying for Lyft, et cetera. So, but we are coming to our conclusion. Our hour is almost up. I do want to give a shout out to April Adams. Hello from the Borough President's Office. April, did you want to say anything?
No, I won't take up anyone's time. This was an excellent forum. Thank you all so much for hosting this. I think we all know that some of the best ideas and the way that we can execute things that the community needs, they come out of these types of forums, from industry leader experts, from the community. So thank you all so much for doing this.
Before we go away, I wanted to make a comment to the subways. I know the state is very conscious of the idea that if you want people to go back to work, they have to have the transportation available. So this is just a temporary measure. I'm sure when the time comes, it will be reevaluated, and they will make adjustments.
Hey, while we're recognizing elected officials that have joined us, could I also give a shout out to Hannah Wienerman from Congressman Jerry Nadler's office and Mike Stinson from Controller Scott Stringer's office, both leaders on these issues, as well as the borough president. And I'm not sure if I'm missing anybody else, so forgive me.
You're here.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions, for our panelists? We've got a minute.
Yeah, I have one of Andrew. How a restaurateur is going to deal with all the operational changes that are going to face them in the coming months? Yeah, is there any simple way?
It's going to be tough. We're looking at different cities, around the globe that are dealing with this. People are talking about more, contactless mobile payments. There's already concerns, about cash. And we've just at our community board meeting recently had a discussion about prohibiting taking, cash, basically being kind of credit card only. But we just heard from people that they're concerned about taking and receiving cash. Menus, are we going to be using either disposable menus or even perhaps mobile menus? There's somewhere you could just pull the menu up on your screen and order from your server, but there's other technologies out there where you can actually, put an order on a mobile phone, place it, it would go right into the kitchen that way. We've seen dividers, like plexiglass dividers in other places. I think a lot of the kind of fundamentals are going to be based on whatever the requirements are coming out of this. What is the occupancy going to be? Can we operate full occupancy, 75, 50, 30? That's going to make a lot of determination about if people should reopen, when they should reopen, how they should reopen. Washing, a lot of sanitary practices. We've been speaking with the city's health department about that as well. So things that are somewhat obvious, but again, I think a lot of it's going to depend basically on what are the requirements, and questions even about kitchen workers. You know, you can do social distancing perhaps in a restaurant by putting tables 6 feet apart, but what about tight kitchens? You ever go into a, you know, a kitchen on the, you know, Upper West Side restaurant, or go down to a store, you know, for storage? What are the requirements there? I suspect having a face mask and having gloves would be sufficient. That's what basically the recommendations are right now, but you know, we don't know. So it's a little premature to tell, but we are thinking through all of these. And if there are restaurant people here, you know, you can always, you know, reach out and, you know, give some sort of suggestions, but it's gonna be a challenge.
It's going to be a great job. I was a waiter for 11 years, and I can't even imagine there being any form of social distancing inside a kitchen.
No,
You're
we
on
all
top.
used to eat off of our customers.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it's good. It's going to be.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the answers that we're asking are the answers that we can actually ask within ourselves, or how comfortable are we going to be to go into a restaurant or a bar or a theater or a gym or an airplane or a subway. And to the degree that we are comfortable is good chance that it's what a lot of other people are thinking or feeling the same way. And I think the end game is obviously the vaccine and other things, but
maybe I can leave.
What's that?
I just want to maybe on one kind of, you know, I don't know if it's a positive note or what it really is, but you know, as difficult as this time is right now, as people have said that, you know, this too, there'll be a lot of damage, but this too shall pass. And when it comes to restaurants and bars, you know, we're all being told to social distance right now, but we're human beings. We have, you know, human nature, and we crave being close together and socializing. No matter where you're from, you usually can relate to people through food and the traditions of, you know, consuming that food and drinking beers or wine or whatever it may be, you know, after work together. So at some point when it's safe, people are going to crave being back together. And when they are back together, we will be in our restaurants, we will be in our bars. So I'm not concerned, and I know there's so many articles and conversations about, is this pandemic going to change the restaurant and bar and nightlife industry forever? You know what? We're not that strong or powerful. This industry has been here for a long time, and it will come back. But what we need to make sure it can come back on its strongest footing is these federal, state, and city policies enacted to give us a fighting chance. But when we can come back and congregate in a safe manner, we will be. And I know some people on our board, their bars are going to have their doors open waiting for us to come back in our restaurants. So it's going to be tough, but we got to
We'll be there.
Exactly.
And you know, I want to leave one philosophical point.
Okay.
Okay, here it is. The greatest wine, since we're talking food and beverage and restaurants and retail, the best wine comes from adverse conditions. Think about that. We are going through some adverse conditions. A diamond is made under great pressure. We are creating some great wine and some diamonds. There's a lot of wonderful creativity coming about during this time. So there are a lot of good things happening.
Oh, thank you all. I think I'm going to have to bring this one in. Linda?
Yeah, we want to thank our panelists. You guys were unbelievable. Thank you, Larry and Stephanie and Andrew and Doug. You are fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Linda and Christian, can I jump in for one quick thing? This has been recorded, and it will be available on the CV7 YouTube channel. So anybody who's on this who thinks that a friend should see some or all of this presentation, it'll be available to you that way. I encourage you to spread the word. We've had a great turnout today. Congratulations to the committee, but let's keep it rolling.
Okay. Well, thank you also. We'll see you again another time.
We'll see you soon. And oh, one more shout out to Mark Diller, because he really put this, he was our great guide, and thank you. And thank you for our committee members for being here, and community board members. You guys, seeing your faces are like the happiest thing I can think of right now. So thank you all. And we're all in this together, and we'll get through this.
Okay.
Together. Bye-bye. Have a great afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Don't work too hard. Bye-bye.